The forest was silent, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the cold, biting wind. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground. In the heart of the woods, a lone wolf lay motionless, its once powerful frame now reduced to a frail, trembling shadow of its former self. Its fur, matted and dirty, clung to its emaciated body, and its breath came in shallow, labored gasps. The wolf's golden eyes, once fierce and full of life, now glimmered with a faint, fading light. It had been days since its last meal, and the harsh winter had stripped the land of any prey. The pack had moved on, leaving the weak behind, a cruel but necessary act of survival in the wild. The wolf tried to rise, its legs shaking violently under its weight, but it collapsed back into the snow with a pitiful whimper. Its strength was gone, its spirit nearly broken. The cold seeped into its bones, and the darkness of the night began to close in. It was a scene of despair, a quiet tragedy unfolding in the heart of the wilderness. But just as the wolf's eyes began to flutter shut, something stirred in the distance. A faint sound, almost imperceptible, broke through the silence. The wolf's ears twitched, and its head lifted ever so slightly, straining to hear. Was it the wind, or something else? The sound grew louder, closer, a rhythmic crunching of snow underfoot. The wolf's instincts, dulled by exhaustion, sparked to life. It let out a weak growl, a feeble attempt to ward off whatever was approaching. But as the figure emerged from the shadows, the wolf's growl died in its throat. It wasn't a predator. It wasn't even another animal. Standing before the wolf was a creature it had never encountered before, a human. But this was no ordinary human. The figure knelt in the snow, their eyes filled with a strange mix of curiosity and compassion. They reached out a hand, and the wolf, too weak to resist, could only watch as the stranger drew closer. The human's touch was gentle, almost reverent, as they examined the wolf's frail body. From a bag slung over their shoulder, they pulled out a piece of dried meat and held it out. The wolf hesitated, its instincts warring with its desperation. But hunger won out, and it took the offering, its teeth barely grazing the human's hand. As the wolf ate, a spark of life returned to its eyes. The human stayed by its side, offering more food and even a sip of water from a small flask. The wolf didn't understand this act of kindness, but it didn't need to. For the first time in days, it felt something other than pain and fear. It felt hope. But the human's presence was only the beginning. As the night deepened, the forest seemed to come alive in ways the wolf had never experienced. Strange lights flickered between the trees, and the air grew thick with an otherworldly energy. The humans stood, their gaze fixed on the horizon, and the wolf, now able to stand on shaky legs, followed their line of sight. What it saw made its first stand on end. Emerging from the shadows was a figure unlike anything the wolf had ever seen, a creature of light and shadow, its form shifting and shimmering like the aurora in the night sky. The wolf let out a low growl, but the human placed a calming hand on its back, their touch steady and reassuring. The creature approached, its movements graceful and deliberate. It stopped a few feet away, its glowing eyes locking onto the wolf's. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, without warning, the creature extended a hand, or what could only be described as a hand, and touched the wolf's forehead. A surge of warmth spread through the wolf's body, chasing away the cold and the pain. Its muscles, once weak and trembling, grew strong and steady. Its fur, once dull and matted, now gleamed in the moonlight. The wolf let out a triumphant howl, its voice echoing through the forest, a testament to its newfound strength. But the creature wasn't finished. It turned to the human, its expression unreadable, and spoke in a voice that was both ancient and timeless. "The bond between you has been forged," it said. "Together, you will face trials that will test your courage, your loyalty, and your spirit. The path ahead is fraught with danger, but it is also filled with hope. The weak have become strong, and the lost have been found. This is only the beginning." With that, the creature vanished, leaving the wolf and the human standing alone in the snow. The forest was silent once more, but the air was charged with a sense of anticipation. The wolf looked up at the human, its golden eyes filled with a newfound determination. The human smiled, a silent promise passing between them. Together, they turned and walked into the forest, their footsteps leaving a trail in the snow. The night was long, and the journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary alliance. This was the start of something extraordinary. And as the moon rose high in the sky, casting its silver light over the land, the forest seemed to whisper a single, haunting truth. The story was far from over. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the atmosphere began to shift. The air grew heavier, charged with an almost electric tension. The trees seemed to close in around them, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The wolf's senses, heightened by its transformation, picked up on things the human couldn't perceive. A faint, almost imperceptible hum in the air, the scent of something ancient and powerful lingering just out of reach. It let out a low growl, its ears twitching as it strained to pinpoint the source of the disturbance. The human paused, their hand instinctively reaching for the wolf's back, their touch grounding and reassuring. "Something's watching us," the human murmured, their voice barely above a whisper. The wolf's golden eyes narrowed as it scanned the darkness. And then it saw them, pairs of glowing eyes, faint and flickering like distant stars, peering out from the shadows. The wolf's growl deepened, its body tensing as it prepared to defend itself and its newfound companion. But the eyes didn't approach. They simply watched, unblinking and unmoving, as if waiting for something. The human took a cautious step forward, their hand still resting on the wolf's back. "We mean no harm," they called out, their voice steady despite the unease gnawing at their insides. The words hung in the air, unanswered. The eyes continued to stare, their gaze piercing and inscrutable. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they vanished, leaving the forest eerily silent once more. The wolf and the human exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever was out there, it wasn't done with them. They pressed on, their footsteps quickening as the forest grew darker and more oppressive. The trees seemed to twist and contort around them, their branches forming strange, almost deliberate patterns. The ground beneath their feet became uneven, the snow giving way to patches of frozen earth and jagged rocks. The air grew colder, biting at their skin and stealing their breath. And then they reached it, a clearing unlike anything they had ever seen. The snow here was untouched, pristine and glistening under the pale light of the moon. At the center of the clearing stood a massive stone archway, its surface covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change as they looked at them. The air around the archway shimmered, as if it were a portal to another world. The wolf let out a soft whine, its instinct screaming at it to turn back. But the humans stepped forward, their curiosity overriding their fear. "This is it," the human whispered, their voice filled with awe. "This is where we're meant to go." The wolf hesitated, its golden eyes flickering between the archway and its companion. But the human's resolve was unwavering. They took a deep breath and stepped through the archway, the air around them rippling like water. The wolf had no choice but to follow. On the other side, the world was unrecognizable. The forest was gone, replaced by a vast, otherworldly landscape. The sky was a swirling tapestry of colors, deep purples, vibrant greens, and shimmering golds, that shifted and danced like the aurora borealis. The ground beneath their feet was covered in a soft, glowing moss that pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic light. Strange, bioluminescent plants dotted the landscape, their tendrils swaying gently in the breeze. In the distance, towering mountains rose into the sky, their peaks obscured by swirling clouds. The wolf and the human stood in stunned silence, their minds struggling to comprehend the sheer beauty and strangeness of the world they had entered. But their awe was short-lived. A low, resonant hum filled the air, growing louder and more intense with each passing second. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the glowing moss pulsed faster, its light growing brighter. The wolf let out a warning growl, its body tensing as it prepared for whatever was coming. And then they appeared, creatures unlike anything the wolf or the human had ever seen. They were tall and slender, their bodies covered in shimmering, iridescent scales that reflected the swirling colors of the sky. Their eyes were large and luminous, filled with an ancient, almost sorrowful wisdom. They moved with a fluid, almost hypnotic grace, their long, delicate fingers trailing through the air as if they were painting invisible patterns. One of the creatures stepped forward, its gaze fixed on the human and the wolf. When it spoke, its voice was melodic and haunting, echoing in their minds rather than their ears. "You have crossed the threshold," it said. "But this world is not for the faint of heart. To proceed, you must prove your worth." The humans swallowed hard, their heart pounding in their chest. "How?" they asked, their voice trembling. The creature's eyes narrowed, and for a moment it said nothing. Then it raised a hand, and the ground beneath the human and the wolf began to shift. The glowing moss parted, revealing a deep, dark chasm. The creature gestured toward it, its expression unreadable. "Below lies the trial of shadows," it said. "Only those who face their deepest fears and emerge victorious may continue. Choose wisely." The human and the wolf exchanged a glance, their bond stronger than ever. Without a word, they stepped forward, their resolve unshakable. The chasm loomed before them, its depths shrouded in darkness. But they didn't hesitate. Together, they leaped into the unknown, their hearts filled with determination and hope. As they fell, the world around them shifted once more. The swirling colors of the sky faded, replaced by an oppressive, all-encompassing darkness. The air grew cold and heavy, and the ground beneath their feet became slick and uneven. The trial of shadows had begun. The first thing they encountered was a mirror, a massive, towering structure that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. Its surface was smooth and reflective, but the images it showed were anything but ordinary. The humans stepped closer, their breath catching in their throat as they saw their reflection. But it wasn't the person they recognized. The figure in the mirror was twisted and distorted, their eyes filled with a darkness that made the humans' blood run cold. It was a reflection of their deepest fears, their insecurities, and their regrets. The wolf, too, saw its own reflection, a frail, trembling creature, weak and helpless. It let out a low growl, its golden eyes blazing with defiance. This wasn't who it was anymore. It had been given a second chance, and it wasn't going to let its past define it. The human reached out, their hand trembling as they touched the surface of the mirror. The figure inside reached back, its fingers cold and clammy. But the human didn't pull away. They stared into the eyes of their darkest self, their heart pounding in their chest. "You're not me," they whispered, their voice filled with conviction. "I won't let you control me." The mirror shattered, its pieces dissolving into the darkness. The human and the wolf stepped forward, their bond stronger than ever. But the trial of shadows was far from over. Ahead lay a series of challenges, each one more daunting than the last. They would face their fears, their doubts, and their weaknesses. But they would face them together. As they pressed on, the darkness began to lift, replaced by a faint, glowing light. The end of the trial was in sight. But the final challenge awaited them, a test of their bond, their trust, and their courage. The light grew brighter, and the air grew warmer. The human and the wolf stepped into the light, their hearts filled with hope and determination. They had faced their shadows and emerged victorious. But the journey was far from over. The world beyond the trial of shadows awaited them, and with it, new challenges, new allies, and new mysteries to unravel. And as they stepped into the light, the forest whispered once more, its voice filled with a haunting, almost prophetic certainty. "This is only the beginning.